So before we get a little deeper into the Chrome case study, let me just talk about the rice and tuna deal, because there's certain things you'll learn from that you wouldn't actually learn from paperwork. You wouldn't learn it on any course. So let me just talk about what we went through as we went through the due diligence for that transaction, because it actually failed, and we wound up declining the transaction completely. And where it went sour was not just the initial risk attached to the perishable commodities like chicken or tuna, but actually when it came down to credit insurance. Now, when you have credit insured invoices, it's normally a slam dunk, because credit insured invoices is simply a big insurance group saying that if that debtor doesn't pay your client, we'll pay. So the client sells something to debtor for $100,000, and if the debtor doesn't pay, the insurance company steps in and sells. And they normally say something like 80 or sometimes even 90% of the invoice value they'll pay. By the way, it's a rock solid principle that no lender should ever give a client 100% finance. It's just logical. If somebody came to you and said they want to start a business with only your money and they're going to put nothing in and make no sacrifices, you wouldn't do the deal. So just apply that common sense logic. But in this case, where it went sour was actually in the experience of getting the client to provide all his insurance documents. Over the course of about 3 or 4 interactions with the client, sent us the paperwork, there was just, with every interaction, there was a mistake that just gave us that gut feel I was speaking about in the earlier sessions, that this client is not on top of his insurance. So for example, an insurance company will normally want to look at each individual debtor that you've got and say, on that debtor we'll give you a limit of 500,000. In other words, we'll only insure up to $500,000 or rands or whatever the currency is, and if you sell any more to that debtor, you're on your own. So if an insurance company says they'll insure that debtor for $500,000 and you supply $600,000 to that debtor, it means the first $100,000 of any loss that happens is for your own account. Because you've gone over the credit limit that the insurance company set on that particular debtor. And those were the kind of details that we just couldn't get right with this client. And we just kept saying, this is wrong, that's wrong, that's wrong, and eventually gave us that gut feel, hey, this is too risky. If this client isn't on top of his administration, there's too much risk that there'll be something along the way that we don't even know about, that hasn't been taken care of. And when we get to the insurance company to make good on the claim because debtor X hasn't paid, we'll have trouble. And so eventually we put the brakes on the transaction. We gave the client a whole bunch of conditions that he had to fulfill, and we kind of never came back. And then it was only a few months later that we actually just coincidentally bumped into another lender. We were working with another fund, and it turned out that they had been collecting on a bad debt. Very same clients or another complicated set of other companies that the client was involved in, and they had lost money, and they were actually battling with the exact issue that we had picked up on, which was credit insurance. And those are the kinds of experiences that you probably couldn't learn in a textbook, because it's hard to put that on paper. Somebody has simply got to tell you the story of how they interacted and how the little risk signals were flagged, and where your gut said, no, don't go ahead with this. So that's why you're not seeing the rice and tuna transaction. We're going to talk about the Chrome transaction now, which was in fact a successful transaction.